Well, today we have a distinguished guest, Marty Bent. I call him the king of the freaks.
Thank you, Ian.
But with the rabbit hole recap, obviously one of the leading members at Great American Mining. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
Wednesday afternoon where I am. It's a great day to talk Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Every day is a great day to talk about Bitcoin. Right. I'm really excited about one of the things that you talked about recently about the Bitcoin stack, right? And what it promises. So for those who don't know what that is, specifically talking about like the Lightning Network and what we can bring to, this ecosystem, tell us about the Bitcoin stack.
Yeah, so it is a way to describe the structure in which applications and interactions with the base Bitcoin protocol are developing and may continue to develop in the future, and basically describes Bitcoin at the protocol level with the UTXO set, the mining, the blocks of transactions as a layer that gets UTXO is anchored into it, and then they're then leveraged on layers above that protocol layer. So the Lightning Network is one example. A lot of people debate about this, but I would consider Liquid another example of that. And you can even say exchanges or certain types of second layers. But the stack that I'm talking about is the distributed stack built on the distributed base layer of Bitcoin, and then Lightning on top of that. It's also another distributed network of nodes running that, and then you can build applications on top of that. So like another example of that is like Sphinx Chat, which allows you to chat over the Lightning Network, and also has a podcasting player that is compatible with podcasting 2.0, which allows you to embed a Lightning Network public node in your RSS feed. So any podcasting 2.0 compatible app can pick that up, and the users of that app can send content creators sats as they're listening to their podcast. So that is like how it describes the stack. So like Sphinx is probably considered layer 3, which is leveraging Lightning, which obviously Lightning is leveraging the Bitcoin base protocol. So we have the stack that's sort of budding on top of Bitcoin, and it, in my opinion, is the most advantageous way to scale these types of distributed systems is to do it in layers. And so in that presentation I shared yesterday in the newsletter on the Bitcoin stack from Ryan Gentry and Drew Bansel from Ryan's from Lightning Labs, Drew's from Unchained Capital, they said this is, in their opinion, the most advantageous way to scale Bitcoin to billions of users at some point in the future, because you just reduce the burden on the main chain, and then you just push all these very complex applications to higher layers of the stack. Just push the more complex stuff up so you don't burden the main chain with too much data and too much bloat, which is the exact opposite approach that other projects in the space are taking. The example they used in their presentation was Ethereum, which tries to do all this complex application stuff at the protocol layer, which has led to some problems, particularly with bloat. And now they are literally being forced to transition to a whole new blockchain in ETH 2.0 because they made, I would argue, terrible trade-offs with the way their protocol's designed. They didn't take the layered approach at first. They're sort of backing into it now, realizing the error of the ways. So that's my long-winded pitch for the Bitcoin stack.
No, absolutely. It may take longer, but they're building an infrastructure that is safe and secure. So like you would need to build it in layers in that sort of sense. And it allows for the granular payments, right? I think you were mentioning that the developers of the internet actually built a layer for payment channels, right? And that can be utilized maybe would that be layer 3? I'm not so sure, but with the payments in real time, I mean, you can already have that with podcasting 2.0, where people who like what you're saying, they can donate some stats that's being paid in real time on the Lightning Network. But do you see that just happening on the web as well, on different websites? Like any website you have, you can have that same infrastructure.
Yeah, totally. Like one of the biggest low-hanging fruits, I think, is for all these publishers in the media that have these subscription services that nobody wants to pay. So you get, like, go to Bloomberg and you want to read some of their articles, you get, I think it's $5 a month from a particular IP address. Then after you read 5 articles, they send you the subscribe and pay these monthly subscription fees to get access to all the articles you want. And I don't read, and maybe I read 6 or 7 articles of Bloomberg a month, but me particularly, once I get that subscription pop up, I just find a way to get the article via like an archive link or something like that. Whereas if they were, instead of trying to force their readers to be locked into a subscription service where they have access to every article, but they may read maybe 5% of the articles, if that, over the course of their subscription, instead just replace that subscription, and sort of locks you into reading or having access to every article to content paywalls, where you can pay, instead of paying $5 a month for all the articles, you pay 10 cents or 50 cents per article, whatever the price works out to be. And the Lightning Network certainly enables this. It's pretty trivial. I have something on my website called the Dime Bag, which is essentially just a prototype to highlight the functionality that exists. And so if you go to the Dime Bag, it's 10 cents a thought. And I just wrote, or I didn't write, but the developer who helped me build my site, TFTC.io, just wrote a script that scrapes the final thoughts of my newsletters every day and creates like a randomized tool that you pay 10 cents on the Dime Bag, and you're going to get like a random final thought. But that can be ported over to whole articles, like y'alls.org proved early on in the day. And so, like, yeah, that's just one example. And then beyond that, you can integrate Lightning Network into things like VoIP, voice over internet protocol. So you can like have the ability, if with a certain phone number, say you're a very busy businessman or somebody people want to talk to because you have good ideas and good thoughts and good feedback, and you don't really just want to give people your time away freely over, you could technically like create like minute by minute streaming invoices over the voice over internet protocol using the Lightning Network. So you can literally charge somebody like 10 cents a minute, or 10 sats, excuse me, 100 sats, whatever it may be, whatever value you put on your time, and as they're talking to you over the phone, they can stream that to you directly. And those are just 2 examples. There's other things. You can build VPNs on it. You can build the opportunities, and the potential is limitless.
Amazing. And that's being built out right now. Yeah, excited to see this future. I know a lot of people are working on it. I know another thing, with, Great American Mining, how you guys are, the leaders in the space. Honestly, we have to give it to you. Part of that charge of using renewable energies, finding ways to be effective and efficient with your energy, and taking the flare gas from these oil companies and using it to power your mines. Like, tell us about that, and maybe a little bit about the frustrations of, you have like this strategy is in play, it's working, but then you hear from outsiders or other voices who say that no, mining is inefficient. So how do you sort of deal with that dichotomy?
Yeah, it's multifaceted. So particularly like your last point about it not being efficient, but we'll get to that. Great American Mining, I mean, yeah, so we are a Bitcoin mining company, and we're profit driven predominantly. And that's like the beauty of Nakamoto's motor, if you will, the proof of work consensus mechanism with the difficulty adjustment, that incentivizes participants, particularly mining participants, to drive their cost of electricity down as low as possible. And so as a miner, that's a problem we were trying to solve a few years ago. We're like, all right, if we want to scale this, we're going to need our power costs down as low as possible so that we can mine through bear markets and have a sustainable business in the long run. And we stumbled into flared gas. We found a stranded energy source that was being completely wasted, that had no ability to be transported to market in most cases because there's no pipeline connection. And we said, hey, we'll show up instead of we'll solve the problem that you have, which is the inability to bring the molecule to the market, and we'll bring the market to the molecule. We'll pipe that gas. Instead of piping it to a flare, we'll pipe it to generators, and we'll mine Bitcoin with it. So for that profit-driven motive, and sort of led us to a win-win where we're able to profit, and we're able to help producers become less wasteful and less pollute less. So when a producer typically flares that natural gas, instead of sending it through a pipeline or doing something else productive with it, they're a lot of times leaking methane into the atmosphere because the flares aren't always 100% efficient. There are some very efficient flares, but not all flares are equal, and a lot of flares are leaking a material amount of methane into the atmosphere, which is considered a heavier greenhouse gas than CO2. And so by us coming and piping it to generators that have 99.99% combustion certainty, we're ensuring that there's no methane leak on site. And more importantly, we're taking that previously wasted precious molecule, and turning it into something productive. Instead of just setting it on fire, we're creating hashes with it and producing Bitcoin, which adds to the overall GDP of the economy, which decreases the energy intensity index, if you will, which means we're getting more bang for our buck out of the energy that we're pulling out of the ground. So it works for profit, and it works for being better stewards of the environment. And so again, that's a big knock on Bitcoin is the fact that, or at least popular knock on Bitcoin at the moment, is that it's using too much energy. But most people, I can just say frankly, I don't care if this sounds douchey or whatever, like just most people don't understand energy extraction, delivery, and how electricity is produced and how grids work, and they just don't understand the concept of non-rival energy, which is what we use at Great American Mining. Like there's literally, like, we're not competing with consumers who are needing to cool down or warm up their houses. Like we're not stealing electricity or potential energy that could be turned into electricity for them. We're taking energy that has no ability to get to them and actually getting value out of it. And so a lot of Bitcoin's energy critics specifically just don't understand the nuance on the ground of how Bitcoin miners are leveraging these stranded and wasted energy sources predominantly because they're the cheapest energy sources, because they're literally just wasted. And so showing up and paying a little bit of money for it, people are happy to take that little bit of money. They're like, oh crap, I was actually spending money getting rid of this, and now you're going to give me money to use it. So that's annoying because Bitcoin makes us extremely energy efficient. I think Nakamoto's motor, again, is going to lead us to peak energy efficiency just from pure economic incentives that thrust miners out into the wild to go find these stranded energy sources that are being wasted. And they're just going to be like, all right, no more waste. We're going to use these. We're going to be efficient with these resources. And then the other thing too is like the literal efficiency of the ASICs is growing exponentially in terms of their ability to take electricity and turn it into hashes. Like it's getting more and more efficient. They're able to use less electricity to produce more hashes over time. The heat per the joule per terahash necessary to produce the hashes that ASICs do has gone down pretty considerably over time. So like the actual compute aspect of mining is getting more efficient over time, as well as miners in meat space are making us more energy efficient.
you mentioned ASICs, and unless you're in California, with that Alienware, you might not get that shipment. That is ridiculous. We can go wherever we want, but that's what just popped in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. So a proponent would say, just so we can have a little dialogue. What about wind? What about solar? Right? And there's some very famous people that we won't name who says that they won't get involved seriously until we can reliably use solar and wind as an energy source for the mines. Now, what with those energy sources? What are the trade-offs that you're getting, and are we at a technical point where we can use those energies efficiently, as nuclear or something like that?
I would
I know
say
the short
no.
answer, but go ahead.
We're not at that point. But
Yeah.
yes, as a miner, right? Like it's ruthlessly competitive in the mining industry specifically. So you want to drive your all-in electricity costs down as low as possible, which wind and solar provide that opportunity, mainly because they're subsidized to a certain extent, especially in places like Texas. That's why you'll see a lot of miners aside wind farms and solar farms in West Texas, because they have really cheap electricity. However, it is because of subsidies, they're able to offer a lower electricity cost per kilowatt hour because the construction and maintenance of those facilities is being subsidized by government handouts. So that's one thing. And I don't know if that'll last forever. So if those subsidies run out, that price of electricity goes up overnight. So that's a risk to take into consideration. That's a political risk that exists with wind and solar. Another one is intermittency. Like, so if you have a stretch of days where it's very cloudy and the sun doesn't come out, or a stretch of days where it's not windy and the wind turbines aren't blowing, and you don't have a battery that's sufficient enough to store multi days worth of electricity, you're going to have downtime on those mining operations, which is the last thing you want as a miner. The ASICs, the computers that allow you to hash, they should be viewed as physical options that are only producing revenue flows if they're turned on and hashing. And the risk of presented by wind and solar, particularly because they're unreliable, because you can't rely on the sun to be shining and the wind to be blowing and the batteries to be fully charged at all times. For me personally, if it may make sense in certain areas that have a history of sustained wind and sunshine, but not everywhere. So there's a limited, probably, surface area on the planet where it makes sense economically. And I would never want 100% of hash rate using those sources because of the intermittency and the geographical concentration of hash rate that would drive. Like, again, if you can only do it in a certain amount of places with certainty that you'll have wind, sun, and battery for at all times, you're going to have most mining done in very few places, which is not what we want. We want it to be done in as many places as possible. And so that's why I actually love the model that we have at Great American Mining, because it helps you distribute hash rate production very granularly, where we have our operations in 20-foot shipping containers, and they're spread out across the United States right now on little well pads. So we have 700 kilowatt boxes that we can drop off 2 at a time, 1 at a time, 10 at a time, all over the country, and they're not connected to the grid, so you can't really identify them unless you're the oil producer knows that we're running them. So it's a good way to distribute hash rate and do it in a way that is environmentally friendly, in the sense that it's reducing pollution and waste and making us more energy efficient. So Elon, I'll call him out, wants to
He was like, "Fuck it, I'll do it.
100% of that.
I'll say the
So
boogeyman's name."
I think Elon's got perverse incentives, and he's playing a capital
Mhm.
market game and an ESG game that he has to posture a certain way, or the massive investment funds that hold a ton of his stock will drop it overnight because of their
the
ESG.
subsidies and everything. So he's held
Yeah,
in sort of way. Yeah.
yeah, he's co-op. He's not co-op, but he's beholden to the whims of people outside of his company.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to put on the full tin hat, but you keep on leading me to the well, man. Jesus.
Put it on.
Yeah. Keep on inching me there. Well, because I know, well, to finish up the energy thing, and I think you just laid it out perfectly. It's those different channels is geographically restrictive, and like all things that's natural is unpredictable, right? So if you want predictable, reliable energy that's constant and consistent, those forms are just not as reliable today. But I hate, hopefully this doesn't trigger you, but, and I know you talked about it recently, but with the ESG, how they're decommissioning nuclear plants, right? Because it will fall under their, I guess, recommendations, let's just say, to what is nobody knows. Everybody knows that is just like, hey, we want to comply to these different rules and recommendations, but it seems like it's a sliding scale. It's a sliding target.
Well, it's
So
certainly
the
a target.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
they'll act like they're environmentalists and they want to help the environment. And the other thing too, the ESG movement specifically, like they LARP about helping poor people and minorities and like what they're doing with the decommissioning.
It's the oldest game in the book, man. And
Yeah,
that's something that we can talk. Obviously, we chat about it before. Is it's hard to separate, because when you have people outside of your community using you as a shield to push their own agenda, right?
yeah, and especially when
What? Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but
Yeah.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead. No.
I'm getting frustrated because it's like they'll LARP about it, and then so like New York City, they are decommissioning. It's not like they're planning on it; they are decommissioning these nuclear facilities. About like I think the one in New York that was on the Hudson, they complained about like some fish eggs that were dying, and it turned out to be like not true at all. However, they were successful in pressuring the governor and Andrew Cuomo to decommission it anyway, and so they decommissioned it, and it's all like, oh, we need to do this for the safety, and like environmental terrorism affects minorities and poor people like the worst. And then like you decommission that nuclear facility, you don't replace that energy generation with the same amount of energy generation. So naturally, supply and demand, you have less supply of electricity being produced, and demand is steady to actually increasing because they decommissioned it in April as we were going into summer, and people turned on their ACs more between the months of May and September. And so you took away a shit ton of supply. Demand is starting to go up, and in New York City, electricity prices are going up. And it's not just
which directly impacts those neighborhoods that you're trying to save, or that you're saying that you're looking out for.
It's material costs that get added to their bills every month, and it's like, oh, you're actually doing the opposite of what you're saying you're doing. It's frustrating.
It is. And we know the game. We know the game. So we try to separate ourselves like, no, you ain't doing this for black people. I'll tell you that right now. We know it. Like, yeah, like this is the oldest game in the book, man.
Let's divide and conquer, right? They try to, we're seeing it like back the COVID right now with the vaccinated, unvaccinated, or trying to pit people against each other. We see it with race all the time. We see it with climate all the time. We see it with Trump. Like it's just a never-ending propaganda tactic to divide and conquer, to appeal to people's emotions, even when, and then do the exact opposite. That's exactly what's going on with the climate emergency stuff. I would argue, like, we're not in a climate emergency. I feel confident in saying that. Like, if we were in a climate emergency, more people will be dying from climate-related deaths. Over the last 30 years, climate-related deaths have fallen by 98% across the world. And that is because we've been able to get cheap electricity to people that enables them to protect themselves against nature, which climate is a part of. Like, that's the other thing. Like this whole push towards unreliable renewables that are going to make things more expensive is going to, again, hurt people in these emerging economies the most if they're forced to go along with like these emissions targets and these climate emergency goals. Like they're not going to be able to utilize the cheap, dense energy resources that will allow themselves to pull themselves out of poverty. Like it will hold them back.
Right, man. And that's what I'm looking at right now, like the global perspective of all of this. More specifically, like the IMF, the World Bank, and these different contracts and loans that they have on other countries, poor nations, and really it's just to keep them in debt for 20 to 30 years, so then they can put their own military base, the United States or these G7 central banks, to have occupation in those areas. You know what you gotta read, dude? Have you read the Confessions of an Economic Hitman?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah, it's insane.
you have?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
they're
Yeah.
it's I mean that's the playbook, and people. That's the other thing that's very frustrating is like people put these authority figures who have time and time again like raped and pillaged whole economies. I mean, the economic hitman describes what the IMF, the US, and the corporatocracy did to many countries. Like Latin America has been pillaged by the IMF. They're basically like just a shark private equity firm that goes in, guts countries, loads them up with debt, brings in foreign corporations to extract their natural resources and ship them abroad for profit without allowing the local communities to profit off of the land they live on. And so like Christine Lagarde, she was head of the IMF. She was the finance minister in France, during which she got convicted for allowing Nicolas Sarkozy, the president at the time, to give out hundreds of millions of dollars, US dollars worth of just handouts to like his best friend. She like okayed that and got convicted for it, but didn't send any jail time. And now she's the head of the European Central Bank and is like pushing central bank digital currencies on people
CBDCs,
that'll have like complete control. And like these people are just allowed to rape and pillage, and because they hold high positions in these banks and within governments, they get away from it because people just view them as an authority figure and think that they have their best interests in heart. But again, similar to what we were discussing earlier with the LARPing about the environment, look at what they do, not what they say. Like they'll say whatever they need to say to get people to believe in them, but when you just look at what they do, they're doing the exact opposite.
One of the craziest things that I was reading recently, I think it was back in March. So, IMF, they help, developing countries who are in economic need. And one like really stuck out to me. So Latvia, there's certain targets that they need to meet in order to get the funding. And it was like something like they missed their 200 million euro disbursement from the IMF. And because they needed to cut their budget to hit this 5% target that IMF was sort of giving to them in order to get that loan, and they cut it down to about 7%. So they didn't get the loan. Closed down public hospitals and schools, and there were protests, during this time, and they wind up still not getting the money. So like it's just like they closed down public, schools and hospitals. Sorry, you're not getting anything, and I just destroyed. I think it said like for the first quarter, their GDP declined by like 18%, something like that, some crazy, and they still didn't get the money. So stuff like that, man.
Yeah, well, and they pick winners and losers too. So that's an example of them picking a loser, like, oh, too bad. And then another example to the other way is in the European Union, well described in a book called Boomerang by Michael Lewis, which is him traveling around the world to all the places where like the great financial crisis started and started spreading. It starts in Iceland, moves to Greece, Ireland, but when he gets to Greece, in Italy specifically, he describes how I believe it was the IMF, Goldman Sachs, and the European Central Bank helped Italy and Greece cook their books to masquerade their debt to GDP ratios so that they were allowed to meet the threshold to get into the European Union. I think So they wanted Greece and Italy in the EU for whatever reason. And I believe it was the IMF, Goldman Sachs, and the ECB like worked with the governments to cook their books to get that ratio in line, so they would be accepted in the EU. So as an example, them picking winners in some cases, which is just they have way too much control over all this stuff.
A lot of these developing nations are so tied to the monetary policies of banks that are 5,000 miles away from them, right? Especially when I'm not sure if you read the Alex Gladstein. I mentioned this a couple of episodes, but this stuff, it just can't get out of my head. Where their former colonial states, the Western African countries, like Cameroon, Congo, Senegal, where after they got their independence, it still was financial colonization. So 60% of their treasury reserves, the African nations' treasury reserves that were former colonies of France, that money is held in French central banks, right? 60%. And there's no transparency. If I'm, the president of Senegal, I can't go into France and Paris and like, hey, what are you doing with my money? 60% of it is in there. As am I a free sovereign nation, or is this colonization all over again? Financially, you can't do it physically, you can't do it politically, socially, but the money is still, held. It's still shackled. So these countries, it is in their best interest to opt out of that system. Even countrywide, not just for the citizens, obviously for the citizens, but developing nations, the actual nations, man, because they're beholden to something that's bigger than them.
Yeah,
So
no autonomy. And in that article, Alex describes how like the French government just devalued that. What was it, the FAC? Isn't that what they call it?
yeah, the CFA franc, yeah,
FIFA.
yeah,
And they
CFA,
just
yeah.
devalued
So
it overnight, and people woke up and their savings were worth half of what they were the day before. It's disgusting. And this is like a lesson that many people, philosophers, I think back to Aristotle or Plato, Jesus throwing the money changers out of the temple. Like you've had like Lord Rothschild say, I care not who writes the laws and governs nations. I care who controls the bank. Like you've had Thomas Jefferson warn about it. Like throughout history, there's been very prominent figures that have stood the test of time, and we still read about today that have warned, like, don't fuck up the money, don't give bankers control of the money, or they will rape and pillage the land that they operate within. Or
because we're humans. That's the thing. Like when a lot of people ask me about Bitcoin, it's just like, okay, you're taking the human aspect out of the financial system, right? Because we are naturally flawed. We are naturally greedy. And when we have leverage, we try to exploit that to this furthest extent. That's just something in our character, how we are. Hopefully we get better. Hopefully we improve. But that is, we tend to fall. I'm not saying as individuals, but collectively, as I'm saying, as a group, to the lowest parts of our nature. So why would you want another person who's just as greedy, just as, if they had the chance to be as oppressive as you, to control the monetary system, to control your money, to control the economy? They're not better than you. They're just another human like you, So
yeah, and
yeah, we got to take it out.
They play within the incentives set before them, and the way the monetary system set up right now, the incentives are completely whacked and incentivize people to print money and give it to their friends. And
Who's closest to the spigot, right, man?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the product of that is you just drive this massive wealth inequality gap, and then you turn around and say, "Oh, well, it wasn't us. It's not us. Like it's something else that we have to figure out." People aren't paying enough taxes. It's like, that's.
But it's up to us, though. It's up to the people to know the ways that we're getting taken advantage of, right? And it takes people like you to shout from the mountaintops. It takes people like me who's trying to do the same. You know, what
Oh,
I'm
you're
saying?
doing the same. We're all in this together. That's the beauty of Bitcoin, man. Like this distributed content machine that's been created around it. People have been awakened and like, holy shit, this is the solution. And you, myself, others going out, and there's 8 billion people we have to like shake. Like, hey, like this shit fucking needs to change, and here's the solution. It's happening slowly but surely. 12 and a half years in, I think what's going on in the mainstream world too, particularly, we have an advantage and an opportunity here where like the politicians, the bankers, the corporate class, if you will, are fucking up so bad that people are beginning to question. They're looking for answers. So if you're here and I'm here, and they can turn to be like, all right, what are you guys talking about? Like, it just makes it incredible opportunity to wake more people up.
Absolutely. Well, Marty, you know you're the homie. You're the homie for sure. And
Stop it, man.
see, you're one of the few people that I was just like, we only met once before, but I was like, I can just chop it up regular. Like I can just literally just chop it up with you. We can just go. We can just go. And
it's always fun to talk about the world, especially when you can see it with like eyes wide open. Like, again, look at what these people do. Don't look what they say. They'll smile, fuck you, and say whatever you want to hear, but they'll stab you in the back as soon as you turn around. Like,
real talk. Yeah. Now, if anybody wants to learn more about your thoughts, what you're doing, the podcast, where should we send them?
I hang out on Twitter mostly, so that's at Marty Bent, MartyBent, and then so you can find me there. And then my website with all my content is TFTC.io, and if you want to check out what we're up to at Great American Mining, to get a visual of what it looks like to take the flare gas and mine Bitcoin with, you can go to gam.ai, GAM.ai is our website there.
Thank you. All right, man. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, and really had fun today.